So this one, I am sharing screen, right? Thumbs up. Yes. Okay. Uh, this is the redo of our December training enrollment, completing college and dev ed, and out-of-state enrollment, if we have enough time. And given the group that's on the screen, you know the basics of this, but we're going to go through it just, well, Nora and Steve are new. Nora, Steve, and Myra are new, so they need an opportunity to ask questions. And then just kind of record it so anybody can kind of access it in the future. All right. Now I got to remember what's on here. So as you know, you go to sleds.mn.gov, and we're actually going to look at the reports here in enrollment, completing college. And this is an older screenshot, so you don't see out-of-state enrollment, but it is there as well. So I'm going to stop sharing and jump right over. All right. Thumbs up. You can see my website. All right. So we're going to go down here under the high school graduates, enrollment, completing college, dev ed, and out-of-state enrollment. So we always start with enrollment. This is the number one question any SLEDS coordinator will get asked is how many students go on to college and where do they go? I think our whole system was designed just to answer that one question. And a little bit of history. How do we do it before SLEDS? Well, the only way to estimate college enrollment in the state was to take the literal number of students who graduated and the number of students who said they were just starting college for the first time and compare the two. We didn't actually know if they were the same students or who they were demographically. We just had two large numbers. Interesting enough is it actually was fairly accurate, but now we do it at a person level and we link one person to one person. So we know if Joe Smith actually went to college and the characteristics of Joe Smith and the characteristics of the college, how long he stayed in college, which colleges he went to, what did he do, did he finish, and everything he did after college. So do high school graduates move on to college? We are seeing here the class of 2021. And so as you know, the state picture always looks like this. You have a bar that shows in and out state Minnesota. 41% of graduates enroll in state, just under 25,000, and 20% enroll out of state. Where do they go to college? In terms of distribution, public 4-year, public 2-year, and outside Minnesota. And then you have some split between the private 2-year and the private 4-year. The third pane is always credits taken in the first term of college. And we specifically have bands set up 1 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 11, 12 to 14, and 15 plus. These correspond to enrollment levels set by the U.S. Department of Education. 1 through 5 is kind of at less than half time. 6 to 8 is half time to less than 3/4 time. 12 is full time based on federal definitions, and 15 is full time based on state definitions. And this is usually where I always make the joke about why do the feds say 12 and the state say 15? Well, if you take 15 credits for 120 credit bachelor's degree, you graduate in 4 years. If you take 12, you graduate in 5. And so we have set up our entire system focused on that 12 credit full-time model thanks to federal policy, but then we kind of lie to students and tell them they're going to graduate in 4 when they're not. So the University of Minnesota requires 13 or more, which essentially means all students take 15 credits. The state funds full-time at 15 credits, but the federal policy still says 12. A lot of other states are moving to 15 as well. The distinction between 12 and 15 isn't that great statistically. Students who take 12 or more consistently have about the same odds of graduating as students who take 15 or more. They just take longer. And as you can see, if you combine these two categories, 87% of Minnesota high school graduates going on to college enroll full-time. They are a very different population than adults going to college. The top 25 colleges attended. University of Minnesota is always going to be number 1, and it will probably show up in all of your top 25 lists, simply because of the number of students Twin Cities enrolls. It enrolls approximately 5% of all high school graduates, and so you will see it in the top 10 pretty much for every high school in the state. And then, of course, it's followed by Duluth, Mankato, and then North Dakota State. If you look at this list from a local level, this list of top 25 should reflect the colleges that are closest to the high school, right? So if we were to change our high school up here to Fergus Falls, Kennedy, which colleges are the closest to Fergus Falls? Megan's not here to give us the answer. Minnesota State in Fergus Falls. UND, North Dakota State College of Science, North Dakota, Moorhead, Duluth, Twin Cities. You see how that geographic proximity occurs? If we were to change it to Mankato for Jason, let's do Mankato East. Mankato State, South Central, University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, Winona. So the number one college that any high school should be partnering with is the community and technical college that's closest to them, and pretty much any other college that's close to them geographically. And this, of course, shows the number of graduates statewide going to that institution, the number of graduates in the district, and the number of graduates specific to that high school. And we should have one more pane. Yes, time trends. So this is the big one. This one is relatively new. So this one will show you across for the last 6 years of high school graduates, what percentage enrolled immediately, what percentage enrolled within 1 year of high school graduation, what percentage enrolled within 2 years of high school graduation, and what percentage enrolled within 3 to 5 years, 6 to 8 years. Do we have a 6 to 8? Not here. And you'll note, the first thing to note is how the immediate fall enrollment has changed. And we're still on Mankato East, but if I were to switch it back to statewide, we have dropped from 69% steadily down to currently 61% for the class of 2021. Now, hopefully the class of 2022 will be relatively stable at that 61, 62%, but fingers crossed is what we can say. We did see declines that were greater at 4-year colleges and 2-year colleges this last fall. In terms of the time trend, you'll notice about the same number of students enroll within 12 months, about 2,500 to 3,000 enroll within 10 years. These groups haven't quite reached 5 years yet, so about 2,000, 3 to 5 years. And then if you were actually to change to an older year, the time trend would show you the older data. So, whoops, that's not where it goes though. 2015. We had steadier enrollment rates at that time. And if you look up here, this 85% of students from the class of 2010 that did not enroll meant 85% did. So 85% of Minnesota high school graduates in 2010 enrolled in college within 10 years. Well, we have 11 years of data now. 85%. I like to say the notion of college or career is probably a false one. Pretty much everybody will likely, well, almost everybody will likely set foot on a college campus for some form of education or training at some point in their lives. And so it's a question of what age are you going to be when you set foot. The more information pane at the bottom gives you the links to the data interpretation guide, the Getting Prepared report, which Steve actually helps produce, which has a little more detail in a Tableau format about demographics and college going within the first 2 years. You can also download the web report for all high schools and years if you just wanted the full file in one single Excel document. Yeah. If you just want the data that's showing on screen, you just click this button, download all data. So that was like 5 whole minutes on college enrollment. Are there questions? You can dig into the subgroups. Of course, we haven't done a lot with primary disability, but generally students who have a form of disability have lower college enrollment rates, as we saw by the deaf, hard of hearing report. You can choose various race, ethnicities, genders, and other criteria. Students who take some form of rigorous course taking have higher college enrollment rates than students who don't. Questions? There is another version of college enrollment. So if you were to jump over to report card, how many students go to college? Do you see this in the bottom? Now, this is also going to give you a metric on college going, but it's not the same metric as the one you see on SLEDS. Okay. And if you were to actually click on it, the differences are spelled out. So that's the good news. We're just going to look at statewide. So this is the total number of students earning a regular high school diploma who enrolled in any institution within 16 months of graduation. So 16 months falls between 1 year and 2 years after high school. So it's essentially 1.5 years. So it's a different time frame. So you can see here it's showing it's showing 60,687 graduates, I'm assuming for the 2018 class, with just under 39,000, which means 64%, which is approximately what it was on SLEDS. What was it on SLEDS for 2018? We had 67%. Myra, we'll talk about that offline. Then what you have in college credit accumulation, this is a slightly different metric. So this one is specific to U.S. Department of Ed reporting. And so this is the number of students enrolling in a public college within 16 months, which is a very important distinction, and earning 1 year of credit within 2 years of enrollment. So 1 year of credit would be 30 credits within 24 months after starting college. And about 58% of students earn 30 credits within 2 years. Why 30 credits? 30 credits is a momentum point. So if students can achieve 30 credits, their odds of graduation and completion go up dramatically. And so if they're going to drop out, the majority drop out within those first 2 years and never reach that 30 credit threshold. I'm not sure why the U.S. Department of Ed chose it though, but that theoretically it does have a basis. Questions about report card? All right. Jumping back. As you know, you don't want to just know if students move on to college, you want to know if they complete. So the report's going to stick at statewide, and we're going to, the class of 2020 hasn't really completed yet. So what you see here is that they've enrolled in their second year of college. And so we're going to jump it back a few years. Let's go ahead and jump it back to 2015. All right. So college persistence and graduation is the first report that you see. You'll see 3 bars. What this means is the percentage of students who enrolled in the first year and last stayed through the second, stayed through the third, and stayed through the fourth. You can see within year 1 and year 2, it's 84%, which means 16% of students dropped out in the first year, either during the first year or at the end of the first year. The next mark is 76%, which tells you that 84 minus 76, 8% of high school students enrolled in college dropped out between year 2 and year 3. And then it goes down another 6 percentage points. So 6 percentage points dropped out between year 3 and year 4. And this is the total. There were 44,367 students enrolled in year 1. This differs slightly from the prior report in that these are students enrolled in year 1 at any time. So regardless of whether enrolled immediately, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years after high school graduation, it's starting the clock for whenever they entered. So this number will not match the prior report unless you add up the cumulative number of students who started college. You'll often hear the terms persistence and retention. Does anyone know what the difference is besides Steve and Nora? Persistence and retention. Colleges track retention rate. Retention means retained at the same college. St. Thomas retained these students versus students persisted in college means they were still in college, but at any college. So retention is one college, persisted is any college. So I will tell you, higher ed staff tend to use them interchangeably unless we're writing something really formal, and then we'll get it right. Top 25 majors of enrollment. You'll see here it's a combination of award level and major. So of course, your transfer curriculum is number one. You had 4,800 students who are taking the Liberal Arts and Sciences Associate's degree, which is the general transfer curriculum for Minnesota State and the University of Minnesota. Next is always business and health. So you can see you have a bachelor's in business, a health associate's, and a bachelor's in health, and then a bachelor's in education. These rarely change. These are what the top majors have been for the last, I would say, decade at least. So when you get a question about are students majoring in things that are likely going to get them jobs, well, it's business, health, and education. What do you think, right? Probably going to get them a job if they finish. All right. Highest undergraduate credential completed. So this is your completion rates. And we do tend to use the terms completed and graduated interchangeably as well in higher education. They do tend to mean the same things. Graduation is just almost a time point event, whereas completion means completing a program, but we use them interchangeably. So for the class of 2015, if you look at the all degrees, which actually should say all awards or credentials, 55% of the class of 2015 completed college. They graduated. 5% of those, their highest award since starting was a certificate or diploma. 9% it was an associate degree, 41% it was a bachelor's degree. We are a bachelor's degree producing state and always have been. It's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing, it just is what it is. As this class goes out farther, you will see you will only see undergraduate degrees on this one. I forgot. In the K-12 data mart, you will have highest, which does include graduate degrees. Time to college completion. So this is time since high school graduation. Of those 55%, 32% graduated within 4 years after high school. Another 19% took 2 more years. Those are your 12 credit takers. And 4% took 7 to 8 years. This 55% will continue to inch up over time. So it will inch up a percentage point probably every 2 to 3 years for quite a while. So, but 50 to 55% is what we've been seeing for high school graduate completion rates in college, which isn't great. So top 25 majors of completion. This is very similar. This is going to be very similar to the top 25 majors of enrollment. And of course, what are your top ones? Bachelor's degree in business, associate degree in liberal arts, bachelor's degree in health, bachelor's degree in education. But then you have bachelor's degree in biosciences in here. It's snuck into the top. So it could be that they're just more likely to stay in that major and complete, as opposed to changing majors. You can see we give you a fairly long list. This doesn't tell you exactly what field they're going to go into. That's why you need the more detailed SIP data. But it gives you some a sense. Yeah. All right. And that takes us to the bottom of the report, where again you have your download all links. Questions about completing college?
Maybe just an observation. I thought it was interesting that the liberal arts transfer curriculum was the #1 for enrollment, but not the #1 for completion, which I think maybe in part reflects that you don't always see the completion at that level prior to transferring up. as well as
Correct.
possibly reflecting something about completion rates, but I think both factors could be there, right?
Right. You don't
Yeah.
need to complete the associate degree in liberal arts to transfer. It's not a requirement.
Right. Coming from a 2-year college, a lot of our students, it didn't mean much to them, so they didn't feel the need to lock that in. They just brought those credits forward.
Correct. Other questions? Do you think this will vary based on region or high school?
Are you asking just the overall
Group?
percent
Yeah.
completing?
Well, I mean the various statistics. But that's a good starting point. Would you expect to see the percent of students persisting and or graduating change dramatically when you look at high schools? Yes.
I would expect changes, yeah.
That was a trick question. I'm sorry. I made it harder than it needed to be. So I would say the number one thing to look at when trying to figure out before you even look at the data, if you think a high school's college going rate is going to be higher or lower, is do they have a college going culture? So if you were to look at high schools like Eden Prairie, Edina, Mounds View, Irondale, they have a very distinct college going culture. I'll actually take Edina out of that group. Eden Prairie, Mounds View, and Irondale, they have a very distinct college going culture. They do things to keep students preparing for college from 9th grade on. So those high schools are going to have higher than average rates as compared to the state. Then you do have some high schools that they're more focused on a technical education, and because students may be completing that technical education in high school, they might have lower than average college going rates. But the question of is what does that mean, right? One is not necessarily good, one is not necessarily bad. There are distinctions in how high schools approach college going and career planning in general. And so be aware that there's other stuff going on. Also, income, socioeconomic status. High schools that have a higher percentage of students who are facing poverty will have lower college going rates than high schools that have a higher socioeconomic status.
Just going to say that, Meredith, that's the biggest one because I was just pulling,
Yeah.
we're working on something and your persistence rates, even if they go first year, it drops. It's like, it'll drop way off the charts after 1 year to 2 years, based on your free and reduced. If you compare
Yeah.
the two groups, it's like sometimes it's about half, persistence rates, for free and reduced in general.
Yeah. Yeah. It will change. In terms of majors, it's really going to reflect the colleges that are around them. So if we ignore the metro, if you're in an area that, well, if you're in Fergus Falls, you have a number of four-year colleges that are around you. You saw them on the top 25 list, right? But if you're in an area that doesn't have a ton of access to a four-year college and you see more two-year colleges on their list, you'll also see some variations in what majors they take there, as well as the completion rates. It's what's available to them geographically, what's available to them in terms of education options. Yeah. Great. Any questions before we jump? All right, developmental education. I can make Steve present this one since he's done the report for the last. I made Steve start doing the report before he started full-time at OHE, and now he's handed it off to someone new. So this is developmental education. This is a kind of a window into a larger legislatively mandated report that the Office of Higher Education has to do. And this is actually one of the first reports we ever produced with SLEDS. College growing was a great statistic, but this was a full report because it was legislatively mandated, and we were making some changes so it could be reported using SLEDS data. So first, the term developmental education. Does everybody know what developmental education is? Developmental education essentially are skills or course some sort of coursework content that needs to be completed before the student is assessed as college ready or being able to enter a first year course at a college. It is specifically called developmental education, not remedial education. Remedial education implies that the student learned it and didn't succeed in mastering the knowledge. Developmental means it just wasn't there. It could be that they weren't offered it at all. So we always use the term developmental. We're developing their skill set to succeed in the first year of college. Developmental education is typically, and Nora, correct me if I'm wrong, is typically limited to within 3 class levels of entry into college, because below that it's classified as adult basic education. So is it 3 or 2? There's 2 levels or 3 levels. It's a very technical federal definition.
Correct. Yes,
Do you remember if it's 2 or 3 though?
I think it's 2.
Okay, 2 levels below college. Yeah, at level 3, it becomes adult basic ed. We'll talk about some other changes in developmental education as we go through the report. So what we're looking at here is the percent of high school graduates who enrolled in developmental education during the first 2 years of college. And these are graduates who enrolled right away. So what you see here is a 1-year rate, probably actually a first fall term rate of 9% for the class of 2021. Then if we were to skip back a few years so the data is a little more stable, we'll go back to the class of 2018. You actually have about 20% of high school graduates enrolled in developmental education in their first or second fall term. Now it says first or second fall term because prior to 2017, OHE did not collect spring term data. We do now. So at some point we'll have to transition this report, but because it's a time trend, we want to make sure that the prior years are comparable to the current years. So that's why it's first or second fall term.
And this is
The average
the percent of high school graduates who enrolled in college, the percent of those that enrolled in developmental education, right? Yeah. I always have to think hard about the denominators for these rates.
Yes, it's not 20% of all high school graduates. Yeah, now I have to think. Now I'm confused myself. Thanks.
It makes for very long column headers in our spreadsheets where we have to say
Yes.
percent of high school students who enrolled in college who enrolled in developmental education. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So it's 20%. The average number of credits is 5.68, which is just under 2 classes. So we're talking 2 classes of developmental ed. Most students actually only take 1. In terms of where developmental education is offered, it is offered only at Minnesota State usually. And it is typically offered at a public 2-year college. Your community or technical colleges are where your developmental education is going to be offered. There are some dev ed courses offered at a Minnesota State University, but you will typically not see them at a private college or University of Minnesota. The only exception right there would be for some language courses, but given that these are high school graduates, they likely don't need language courses or time management. But I think they've stopped using time management courses. Yeah. Time management's not exactly dev ed either. ACT scores, this should be pretty easy. Students who enrolled in dev ed had lower ACT scores on average than students who did not enroll in developmental education. Developmental education is typically assigned after an academic assessment of some sort. So they're assessed as needing additional skill. What is the most common assessment used in Minnesota for placement into dev ed? You guys know it.
Acuplacer.
Well,
Acuplacer.
the Acuplacer is getting dated. It's yeah.
It's going out of style. Yeah. Colleges are moving to a GPA placement or a course grade review. In Minnesota law, they can also use standardized test scores and MCA scores to determine which students do not need to be placed into developmental education. In terms of completions, what would you expect of the completion status for students in dev ed? I got to change the years. These students haven't graduated from college. Hold on. What do you think? Are students in DevEd going to complete at the same rate, lower rate, or higher rate than students not in DevEd?
Oh, wait, did you direct that specifically to me?
Yes, Steve, you're the
I
only
missed
one
it.
whose
Oh, I'm
microphone
sorry.
is turned on. You and Brenda
Yeah.
can answer because you're not muted.
Students in developmental education will see lower completion rates than students not in developmental education.
Well, this one doesn't show you the comparison, but the other OHE chart does. And it shows at 2-year colleges that is true, but is it true at the 4-year colleges? I don't remember if it's true at the 4 years. I'm not sure it is. It's actually not true at all colleges.
Yeah, right. We've seen somewhere that where by sector where the persistence was pretty close, but then the completion still had some gaps. But yeah, and then I do think that narrowed for 4 years.
Yeah. I think for a couple of years it wasn't even statistically significant. Yeah. So given these are the completion rates for student in DevEd at a Minnesota State University and a Minnesota Community or Technical College. It really bothers me that all these hyphens are missing, Nora. Yeah. I don't know what this is. I don't know why that button's there. Can you flag that for IT? So this is your time trend, not the download all data. And this is the time trend of enrollment in developmental education. These 2 years are going to be a little lower because of the we need to get a full 2 years of data in. You do see a slight downward trend from 2016 to 2019, but if you really want to see the downward trend, go back to an earlier year. So the majority of changes in developmental education occurred between 2008 and 2015. There, maybe it was just my computer. I did change it, right? Ooh. Theoretically, the data changes when you change graduation year. Let's try reloading. There's a gremlin in this one. All right. If you were to look at, we're going to click on more information and we're going to jump over to the OHE page so I can show you this point. So on the OHE page, if you flip through the tabs, you'll have some tabs related to college going, which is post-secondary enrollment. Then you have some of the similar data, but it's a little more defined. Yeah. So this is the percentage. This is kind of small. How's that? Readable? Thumbs up? Okay. This is the, well, Steve, this is your report. Do you want to explain it?
That's right.
Or I can explain it. Okay.
Well, sure. This is showing for high school graduates that enrolled in college by graduation year here, the percent that participated in developmental education by sector. And so we have Minnesota State 2-year colleges. That's where we see the highest percentage of enrolled students participating in developmental education, followed by Minnesota State 4-year, and then University of Minnesota, and then the privates kind of lumped together lower down.
Is this just 49% of all students enrolled at 2 years colleges?
49%, yeah, that'd be right. So we're looking at high school graduates from 2013 who enrolled at Minnesota State 2-year, and that of those, 49% participated in developmental education.
Compared to, we've now dropped from 49% to 36%.
Yeah.
And you can say that it's because high school graduates are better prepared academically, but it's actually probably because the legislature mandated that Minnesota State change how it administered and offered developmental education. So now students have more options for completing those skills needed to enter a first-year class. They can do it through co-requisite instruction, meaning they take some developmental education in addition to a first-year course. They can take it as part of a summer intensive, kind of 3-week boot camp style. I can't think of the word, cram course. There's a number of various ways that students can actually pick up those skills before entering the first year courses that will not be measured by credit enrollment. And so colleges are becoming a little more sophisticated about how they handle students who may be underprepared. In some ways. In some ways, we're still stuck, but yeah.
Hey, Meredith, just quick thought on that too. Is there a possibility too? We're seeing more and more kids enroll post-secondary where their scores might not be higher on a standardized MCA or ACT test, but they're able to complete the coursework they're completing more general education credits, those basic credits within their high schools.
Mhm.
So they might not test well on some of those entry exams, but they're able to do the coursework.
Yeah.
I don't know if that rolls into it.
Normandale actually piloted placement into developmental education based on high school GPA and course grades. And so colleges are taking into account what courses the student took and what grades they got in those courses. And if the student took it like as dual enrolled, PSEO or concurrent enrollment, yeah, that is playing a factor now, a bigger factor than it had been historically. Yeah.
And one other thing to note, like on that developmental ed, I know this one rolls out big with like the schools around us too, is one thing to note, we only capture developmental ed in Minnesota institutions. So like our border schools, if it says it's less than 5%, if 70% or 60% of their kids are going out of state, that's common for us. It's that percentage of all their kids, but really the pool of kids in Minnesota that we'd actually we don't know for basically 60% of their graduating class if they're
Right.
taking developmental ed. So the percentage there really kind of gets skewed if they have a lot of out-of-state enrollments.
I am sitting on a file from North Dakota for Minnesota students who enrolled in North Dakota colleges if they took Dev Ed, but we got the file right at the start of the pandemic, and so any research capacity went away. But now that Nora's here, we actually should analyze it. It won't affect your school so much, Eric, but it might affect the schools in Megan's area in terms of Dev Ed. Yeah, it'll give us a good estimate though.
Well,
Because
Eric,
it'd be
that's
any student
sorry.
going to North Dakota.
Yep. Well, it's another good point because that's yet another thing in that denominator is that it's the percent of high school graduates who enrolled in college in Minnesota.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. All right. The last report as we wrap up is out-of-state enrollment. So this is a report I developed out of frustration with the legislature. So there are two views when you think about students who do go out of state for college. One view is that brain drain. We are losing good students to other states. Why aren't we keeping them? Right? But remember back to that first report when I said, if you look at the top 25 colleges, what's the primary factor and who's going to be on that list? Distance, right?
Location.
Location. So if you're in Eric's region of the world, is South Dakota farther than the Twin Cities? No. So you're gonna see a lot of out-of-state colleges in those border areas that appear on the list that are closer to home than a lot of other Minnesota colleges. So is it really brain drain that they're being lured away, or is the student making a logical, rational decision based on distance and educational offerings? The one thing that you should think about, and Steve and I have more research to do in this area, but of students who go to another state for college, 2/3 of them return to Minnesota to work, right? So they may go to South Dakota State, but then they return back to somewhere in Minnesota to get a job, right? Students may go to California. California is probably a bad example. We haven't analyzed the actual retention rates or return rates per college or state, but there's a chance that they're going to come back to Minnesota to work, right? The other statistic is that 2/3 of out-of-state students who come here for college stay and work in Minnesota. So not only are we bringing our graduates back for the most part, we're keeping the ones that come here. So what would you say is a logical theory for why students stay in Minnesota or return to Minnesota? It's the job market. As long as the job market in Minnesota stays healthy, students who go to out-of-state colleges will continue to return and students from other states will continue to stay. So it's of primary importance that we maintain Minnesota's job market for higher education to actually maintain its stability. Yeah. So brain drain versus educational offerings. All right. So out-of-state enrollment. As I mentioned, this is my legislative frustration report. So the first thing is, where do students who leave Minnesota for college really go? A quarter of them go to Wisconsin. Another 18% go to North Dakota, 11% to Iowa, and 9% to South Dakota. So just those 4 states alone, you have the majority of students, right? Our border states, majority of students. So do you think those students are going to stay and work in those states, or are they going to come back? They're likely going to come back, depending on exactly what they're doing. Yeah. Then, of course, you have what I like to call are the really cool states to move to. Arizona, Illinois, California, Colorado, and Nebraska should not be on that list. But the one thing that's in common is in terms of cost. Do you know what the other common factor is for this list? With the exception of Colorado, California, and Arizona, these are states we all have reciprocity with, meaning that students who go to these states for college do not pay out-of-state tuition. They pay a modified tuition that's somewhere between resident rate and non-resident rate. In Nebraska, it's I am a Nebraska student who came here and because of reciprocity, the rate was 150% of the resident rate, right? So if at the time, it cost a Minnesota resident $3,000 to attend the University of Minnesota for 1 year. It cost me $4,500. It cost a student from California $6,000. For me, that was a pretty good deal. So that's kind of a common theme among these states. Again, I'm not sure why Arizona's on that list either, but the others make sense. Yeah. I'll have to figure that one out. In terms of types
Meredith,
of colleges,
I think the Arizona is online.
Oh yeah, it could be. You're right. Yeah. Arizona State has one of the largest online presence. It is Arizona State, right? Or is it University of Arizona? Arizona has one of the largest.
Phoenix University and yep.
Well, Phoenix is much smaller now.
Yeah, Phoenix is smaller, but you're right. ASU has a huge
It's
online.
Arizona State University Global Campus, has one of the largest online presences in the nation for a public institution. So you're right, that's probably what's driving it, especially in the pandemic. Yeah. Type of college. If they're going out of state for college, where are they typically going? Are they going to a 2-year or 4-year? What do you guys theorize?
4.
You're correct. They're going to a 4-year. 2/3 of them are going to a public 4-year. Another 24% are going to a private nonprofit 4-year. So right there, you have 91% of all students are going to a 4-year college out of state. How about college selectivity? So this means how hard it is to get in. An open access institution, which means they admit everybody who applies, would be a community or technical college. A highly selective would be your Harvards and Yales. So in terms of selectivity, do you think these students are going to selective colleges or non-selective colleges? Well, you already know they're going to a 4-year, so non-selective is not an option, right? Those are your 2 years. So they are actually going to, 45% are going to a selective college and 40% to a more selective college. And this, how do you call it? This little categorization is actually done by the Carnegie Foundation, and it's based on what the median GPA and median standardized test scores are for incoming freshmen and the percentage of applicants that they admit. So selective and more selective are the two. Yeah. And I'm not sure how we got graduate institution in there. Well, yeah. Gender, what do you think? Men versus women? Who's more likely to go out of state?
Women.
Nope. It is women, 57%. Race, ethnicity. Who do you think goes out of state?
White.
84% are white. What percentage of high school graduates are white? Do you remember? It's not 84%. It's a much lower number. I think it's 70, right? 65, 70. Myra, do you know?
I was going to guess 64, but I don't know. That was my guess.
Special characteristics. Only 8% have received free or reduced price meals eligibility, 3% special education, and almost no English language learners. What profile does this give you for students who leave Minnesota for college?
All you have to do, Meredith, is go down to the top 25 high schools of origin and you'll find the demographic. And I won't say it because at all.
You can say it. It's white female students from upper middle class families. Though I would say it's actually probably the gender is probably less of a factor because this is pretty much the split for any gender going to college is usually 60-40, 60% female, 40% male, though it moderates somewhat. ACT score, is it going to be higher or lower? Going out
Higher.
state is going to be
Higher.
higher. So the average score in Minnesota is typically 21 to 22. This is 24, right? So the persistence rates, because they are higher academic and higher, oh, look at that. We're in a wrong class. Hold on. But let's actually jump to Eric, like Eric said, top 25. Minnetonka, Wayzata, Edina, Eden Prairie, Prior Lake, Rosemont. Yeah. There's a definite profile of who goes out of state for college. Yeah. And it's, how do I say it? If you have more resources, you have more educational options. If you have more educational options, you're more likely to take advantage of those options when presented to you. Right? That's what we're seeing here. I'll flip it back so we can look at completion rates. Let's look at 2015 again. So persistence, we're seeing 79% persist from first to second year. So this is interesting. 79 persisted at the same college, which is retention. Another 15% persisted at a different college, but together, this is 94%. Do you remember what the persistence rate was for all high school graduates? What percentage dropped out the first year? 16%. Among this group, it's 6% dropped out. Completion rates, we should see higher completion rates as well. So you have completed at the same college, completed at a different college. This is important because they might go to the University of North Dakota and hate it and come back home. So not all who go out of state stay there to complete college. And so it's important to keep that in mind. But if you look at did not complete 18%, which means 82% did. 82% of high school graduates leaving Minnesota for college completed. And again, that goes with that academic profile, that goes with that race gender profile, the socioeconomic profile. Yeah. The interesting thing about this report is almost what's hidden in the filters, though. Okay. So if you were to click for the class of 2015, you can actually choose. I can't give you a specific college, but for example, if you wanted to know who went to a college in Massachusetts that was a private 4-year nonprofit that happened to have really high selectivity, does anyone know what that college is? It's located in Boston. All right. So there are actually 2 colleges in particular, MIT and Harvard, but there's actually a number, Boston University, there's a number of private colleges in Massachusetts that fit in this category. So we had 116 Minnesotans going to those colleges. Highly selective colleges located in Massachusetts that were private 4-year. If you wanted to know, for example, we did look at this. Let's see, if we wanted to look at North Dakota, and we want to see public 4-year. And I don't, we're gonna say all, because I don't know what selectivity is for North Dakota, but there's 2,100 that went to a public 4-year in North Dakota. Yeah. So you can kind of get a sense of which colleges they're going to. If you wanted to see any state, and you wanted to see how many are going to a highly selective college, that was on the other one, wasn't it? Yeah. It didn't change. But, well, more selective, it has to be a 4-year. So that's kind of your highly selective. You're more selective. Yeah. Needless to say, legislators were not convinced when I told them the socioeconomic profile of students going out of state and how it might not be our biggest focus compared to the equity gaps we have within state. But there is still a focus on the legislature to prevent brain drain in Minnesota. There's also a myth that college is cheaper if you go out of state, which is only true in certain circumstances. Because Minnesota offers grants to low-income students to go to college in Minnesota. So when you compare the price of Minnesota tuition minus grants compared to, say, South Dakota or North Dakota tuition, it actually could be cheaper for them to stay in state. It depends on their family circumstance. So questions about enrolling out of state for college? I don't know how you'll use this one. It's just, again, it was my frustration report on who actually leaves Minnesota for college compared to who stays. Yeah. But I was unconvincing in my spiel.
So Meredith, are we able to see, because I feel like this would be something the legislature may or may not be interested in as well. Students from, like, how many students do we get that went to Wisconsin and then came, how many Wisconsin high school students came over and ended up living in North Dakota? Do we get that? Wisconsin, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, you know, those border states.
You mean how many came to Minnesota and stayed, or
Yeah.
how many jumped us? Oh,
So
Ah.
even how many students, like, and this is where it gets confusing, and I'm just speaking from personal experience. Like, if you look at how many North Dakota students went to North Dakota State and then ended up going and living in Minnesota, it is significant. And so, you know, they're gaining more students, I would bet, on a regular basis by far than they're losing.
yes, simply because of the differences in state population. That would be true North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa compared to Minnesota, Nebraska. It's not so true of Wisconsin versus Minnesota because we're closer in state population. But Steve does this great chart in the reports. So we'll look at the 2021. Oh, I could have pulled up our PowerPoint presentation. Here you go. So Steve is responsible for updating this every year. So it tells you which way they go. So you can see population wise, 9,000 go to North Dakota and 3,200 come from North Dakota. 3,000 go to South Dakota, 1,000 come. Now this is all years, not just new entering and not just high school students. This is all students. Iowa, we only have reciprocity with one college, so it's 139 go and 67 come. Wisconsin, 13 and 8. Yeah.
So is that
Manitoba,
go and stay, or is that just go and get an education?
they go and they're enrolled for at least for the 1 year. Yeah. Now, in terms of stay, I don't know. Is it still in this report, Steve, the 67%?
I think it is in the outcome section, and we've wanted to do more to update some of those figures and get some different data.
This is a
Yeah,
finance report,
there we
but
are.
yeah.
Yeah.
So during the
And this-
1920 year, let's see.
Well, it does credentials first. I wonder if it's next. After all that. Yeah, here you go.
Yeah. So here, 66% of Minnesota students graduating from Wisconsin worked in Minnesota within 3 years of graduation. 62% of Minnesota students graduating from North Dakota reemerged in Minnesota's workforce within 3 years. 50% of students from South Dakota had wages in Minnesota within 3 years of graduation.
That's
And
where I
then
was gonna
40%
go.
of Wisconsin, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So it's a little, I thought it was 66%, but it's lower. Yeah.
I was just gonna go there is because that's what we've tend to notice is a lot of our kids that go out of state to like South Dakota. They don't like looking at SLEDS data. They don't come back and we don't pick them up. Is there been any talk about sharing economic data between North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, some of that so we can track
Yes.
outcomes? Because a lot of our kids go to Sioux Falls areas, Brookings, the Dakotas, and
Yeah.
stay.
Yeah.
Mm.
So we will, I have to think about how we'll do this. So yes, this has been a desire for us for a number of years, but the whole idea of states exchanging person level data to track individuals has been, let's just say the US Department of Labor doesn't like to share data any more than the US Department of Education does. And so the data is there, the ability to share is there, but the willingness to share is not there yet. So we are, for Minnesota students for students who go to a Minnesota college, we will be able to track them nationally now, work-wise. But for Minnesota students who go out of state for college, we don't quite have that set up yet. I was going to introduce Nora to our North Dakota counterpart because at least we could do North Dakota then. But yeah, it really requires us to do a state by state exchange of data. But we did do some with North Dakota already, and so I will have a file. We'll have to open up that file and get a report done on the students who went to North Dakota, at least if they completed. But yeah, and
I was just wondering
let's just
because
say D doesn't consider it a priority right now. Yeah.
no, I figured it's probably not something people really want to share a lot, but just reading like some of the governance and stuff, like we're under a P20 grant, right? So isn't that a federal, like if it's federal, why don't we get federal tax information? Because because states like South Dakota, I would think would even get more complicated because they don't have a state income tax. We
Yeah.
kind of, I mean, I haven't lived there, but I know they don't have state income tax, so I mean, probably be more accurate to track it through federal wages or something. I don't know.
We're not under a federal grant anymore. It expired last year. Remember when I made you all submit all
Oh.
those forms in a timely fashion? We could be under another grant in the future though, but no, the feds are actually the worst in terms of data sharing. It's almost easier for Minnesota to negotiate with the states that surround us than it is to wait for the feds to negotiate. Yeah. So,
well, and like you say, Meredith, the
yeah.
data is there because it's based on implementation of unemployment insurance, right? So it's not dependent on the particulars of the state tax structure, since states have to gather the data for unemployment purposes, right?
Right. In order to administer unemployment insurance, unemployment compensation, unemployment benefits, they have to collect the data.
Yeah.
And they're mandated to do so by the feds, by the US Department of Labor. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, someday you will get that report, Eric, but I do not have a time frame.
I'll tell everybody to hold their breath and it'll be soon, man.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell them there's some supply chain issues.
The map though is actually one of our most popular requests, and it ends up in a lot of presentations. So kudos for the guy 20 years ago who developed our map. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm quick to point out where we show the most common institutions, because when you look at the difference in Wisconsin, for instance, Wisconsin has a number of regional 4 years that are very close to the border, and that helps to illuminate some of what's going on there with the difference in student flow.
What's the page of that one, Steve?
What is that page?
Is it an appendix?
Yeah, I think you were passing it there. It's before the payments section.
So does,
It's some of those horizontal bars. Yeah, so if you look at
there you
this,
go.
you see
This is
just how many
Wisconsin.
students. within students that are coming to Minnesota from Wisconsin, you see the highest percentage being at University of Minnesota Twin Cities. But when you look at the reverse, where Minnesotans going in Wisconsin, you see a lot of those regional 4 years that are closer to the border.
Yeah,
And you know, we
Livermore,
the Twin Cities metro area being, you know, close to the border, you know, along with other population centers,
Is there
I
one
think
for
is a
North
big factor
Dakota?
there. Yeah, we do a similar one for each state, I think.
The same would go for North Dakota because,
Yeah.
you know, North Dakota State University and University of North Dakota are literally both right on the border.
Right. Yeah.
I know
I'm
when
guessing we
my
don't have a
daughter
lot,
was at,
and even Wapaton, one of the NDSCS, one of the technical schools. So I'm guessing there's not a lot of students that are going to like Bismarck State College or
Where are the-
Dickinson State University.
I know when my daughter was at NDSU, they're like 45% of their student population was from the Twin City metro area.
Yep. And that's what it looks like for me. And that's why I was like, and I know why, if you were the legislature, you want to pay attention to that specific number, the number of students that are going across the border to get their education. But I, like, honestly, just from personal experience, I would be far more interested in the total number of students that end up coming back over to Minnesota. Because you get, I promise you, Minnesota gets more than the number of students that they send over in college graduates from North Dakota State University and the University of North Dakota. They get all of the students that they sent over to get educated plus some. I would guarantee it after they're done, that end up living in Minnesota after they graduate from one of those two schools.
You could very well be right. Yeah. All right. That is the end for us. Other questions? Took us kind of on a roundabout kind of direction, but we covered everything. And there was data this time.
Yes, there was. I'm going to stop recording right now. And I just stopped recording yesterday.